All right, guys, welcome to my first deal stories.com.
We're going to edit that. All right, everybody. Welcome to My First Deal Story podcast. This is your host, Brittany Thompson, Leon Thompson. Today we've got a special gift. I know I just totally took it from him. Yes. Today we've got a special guest. I cannot wait for you all to find out who it is, what he's done, what he's doing, about his first deal, how he's helping other people. It's going to be amazing. So get ready. Leon, now you can go ahead and kick us off.
Oh, man, I love doing these podcasts, and I'm happy to have Gary Pinkerton on this podcast. Man, he'll tell you his story, but we got connected to him from just a real estate friend of ours that really has empowered us, that gave us different ways to think outside the box and help us, how to handle deals, how to manage our deals, how to fund our deals the right way. And there's all types of ways to do it. And there's so many things out there in the world where you can get lost in confusion with everything that's out there. But Gary, he's going to give us clarity on how he got his deals and what he's doing now.
Yes. So welcome, Gary Pinkerton. Woo!
Thank you. I feel like I'm running through one of those tunnels, out to the game. And so the guy you were talking about, Aaron Chapman, awesome. So if you haven't listened to that one, please do go back and listen to it. Deep, awesome friend, great friend of mine, and he's changing people's lives out there. So he's changed mine. Hey, I appreciate you all bringing me on. Who am I? What do I do? Right. So my story starts a little bit further back than y'all's, but it's helpful to, I think, understand, because my baggage, if you want to call it baggage, my inspiration for directly owned rental properties goes way back. It goes back to when I was like a teenager. And so I grew up in the late 70s, early 80s on a dairy farm in Southern Illinois. And what's important about that is that it was the end of Jimmy Carter's presidency and the beginning of Reagan's presidency. And there's about a 4-year period of time there where we did not have control over interest rates. It's like the only time in America where interest rates have really been over 10% for any reasonable amount of time on real estate or bank accounts or whatever. And during that period, it actually peaked out at 21%. And the month it peaked out at 21% was, when you hear Warren Buffett say, everyone looks good while the times are good, right? But it's when the tide rolls out that you realize who's swimming naked, right? Well, with respect to having control over interest rates and our future on that farm, we were totally swimming naked. And that, the early 80s just wiped us out in a very short period of time. And so there was this, I'll call it baggage again, that I had with respect to being on the wrong side of inflation and interest rates. I really didn't understand. Really, I didn't understand it. All I knew is I wanted to get the heck out of Illinois. So I joined the Naval Academy because it was free, which was super important at the time because we were bankrupt. And it offered a job, which I also really, really liked. So, and I knew it was going to take me places. There were no oceans in Illinois. So I knew it was going to take me somewhere else. So all of that stuff was perfect for me. And I went on my way. And it wasn't until probably 20 years later, I'm at a reunion and talking to my old next door neighbors and asking them, like, why didn't you guys go bankrupt? Right. And I realized that, one neighbor was like 3rd generation family, and all of our farms, when I was like in grade school, all of our farms were worth maybe a couple $100,000, which are silly numbers today. But so they had a paid off farm. And then on the other side was this family that seemed to always have like new vehicles and stuff. But he said, yeah, we had a loan on our farm too back then. But my dad mentioned to me that the difference was that you guys had variable interest rate loans and we had some fixed interest rate thing.
Wow.
And so what I know now, being a financial professional and talking to people about this and doing the numbers every day, kind of using my nuclear engineering background to dig through all this, is I realized that the guy who had a paid off farm had $200,000 that turned into $600,000 over a couple of years, right? Pretty cool. And the other guy, they only had like $20,000 or $30,000 in their $200,000 farm. And it also went to 600. So they got wealthy because they were on the right side of interest rates, of being protected from that. Right. And our loan and property value were at that, 30 or 40,000, and they both just went up to 600. Right. So it just, the loan went right with it when you were susceptible to high interest rates. So all of that's kind of bouncing around in me throughout my Navy career. I get to 2008, 9, 10, 11. I'm in command of the USS Tucson out in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii in my submarine career. And the markets crash. And I paid no attention because I was taught you just push your money off to somebody else, a professional, let them handle things and they'll take care of it. And then when you're ready to retire, it'll all be there for you. Right. But I saw a large portion of my money fall apart. And thankfully, some of it came back by 2011 when I had time to pay attention again. But what I learned big time there was that I was just on a roller coaster ride. I had no control, no insight. No one called me and say, "Hey, man, we got this." So it was quite interesting because at that same moment, I had 150 people on my nuclear submarine with me. And I would always get reports when something wasn't going right. If it didn't, we weren't safe. Yet in my financial life for my family, I was just free falling, hoping that when I pull the parachute, it works. Right. So I had to get into real estate. And that was kind of the motivation for me. 10 years ago now, 11 years ago. And so that launched me on going out and getting directly owned rental properties.
Yeah.
Wow, that is incredible. So you're speaking to a lot of different. Did I steal it from you, babe?
No, you're good. Ladies always first. Yes.
So you've got different beginnings and dynamics from growing up on a dairy farm and experiencing, like you mentioned, the less favorable side of interest rates, whether they're variable or fixed, to going into the Navy. And let me just take a second. Thank you for your service. Thank you for sacrificing your time and everything to keep us safe and to have command. So thank you for that. We salute you.
I appreciate that.
But to take the dairy farm, to go into the military, and now you're like, oh, that's what happened. That's incredible. Well, I need to get on the right side of this. So I hope that the people listening can hear the different backgrounds. So maybe you come from humble beginnings, or maybe you are a brain scientist like this nuclear engineer we're talking to in Gary. Either way, there's room for you in real estate investing. Yes. So thank you for giving us your background and giving us insight. And so we appreciate that. So yeah, if you could share with us, what was your first real estate deal? Like, how did you find that deal, Gary?
Yeah, so this was where I found this deal actually was on the Real Estate Guys radio. So I think it was a podcast by then, but these guys have been in radio. They're good friends of mine. They've been in radio for like 25, 30 years, I think.
Wow.
And they converted to podcasts, and they're still a great source for how to get started as an investor, And so I heard somebody advertising on that. It was this guy who was building properties in San Antonio, Texas. He'd been successfully doing it before the 2008 crash and somehow through the 2008 crash. So now looking back on it, this seems obvious. I remember I was on a date with my wife once, and we were in this dinner theater place, and like a movie theater where they bring you your dinner, right? And I remember looking up, and it's kind of dark, so I couldn't see a whole lot, but the waitress was bringing a pitcher of beer. And she was like holding it on the side. And I remember thinking, wow, that's odd. I didn't know that was possible. And guess what? It wasn't. Shortly after that, the beer was in my lap.
Oh
no. But I remember now back to this guy who was like the only guy successfully building through the 2008, 9, 10 correction. And I was like, wow, that's odd. Didn't know that was possible. Guess what? It wasn't. What was happening was this guy was running his own little Ponzi scheme, not because he started out that way, but he was a good guy just trying to hold things together. Yeah. And he was behind with contractors and paying them. He was behind with the city, hadn't paid any of the impound fees, but none of this was obvious to me. All I knew was I was getting, thankfully, a well-constructed, beautiful fourplex down in San Antonio, Texas. And I went down for the closing because it was my first one, and everything worked fine. It was beautiful. Water ran, electric worked, and everything. And he gave me a guaranteed rent for 2 years. Basically, he leased it back from me and was subleasing it to the tenants. Why he did that, he said, was because it's the first property in the subdivision. I also don't recommend a new investor get the first property in the subdivision. So he said, hey, I'm going to lease it back because I can get tenants from my other subdivision and put them in here. And sounded good to me. I liked the idea of guaranteed rent. And I know a lot of other investors out there like the idea of guaranteed rent, but please just pause and wonder, why are they giving me a guarantee for this rent? Why is that necessary? Why, if I have this good property in a great market, like they've been telling me with, rising incomes and lots of, a list for people to get my property, why do they have to give me a guaranteed income? Right. So what I found out was that, well, mine was much worse than just it might be hard to get in there. What was really true in my case, I found out 2 months later. So 2 months into this property, I get a letter. Well, first of all, he starts to become a little slow with the rent, and it's just the excuses, right? And so, but I started to worry a little bit about it. But then I get this thing in the mail from the city of San Antonio, Bexar County, and they said, "Hey, you're summoned to come to court because you've been putting people in your property that doesn't have a certificate of occupancy." So I call the number on there, and it's the building code division, and they're like, "Yeah, you haven't even built the property. What are you thinking putting people in the property?" I'm like, no, it's done. Like, I went and toured it. It's beautiful. I got the loan. The appraiser looked at it. He was happy. And they said, well, according to our permits, you haven't completed the mechanical inspections, the electricals. And so this is a long story, but I'll shorten it to say that this guy was just wallpapering over everything he could probably think of. He took, the day I was down there and everything was working, he had electrical like the little meters from his other complex. He had water pipes that he had hard piped in. He took appliances from his other complex to put in there. So the guy was just trying to get through closing so that he could get paid to live another couple of days. And the reason that none of these services were there is because we hadn't paid the impound fees. So I took some time off the Navy. I was at the Pentagon at the time, and I took some time off, 2 weeks of vacation. I went down and I just moved in and started fixing the thing and paid off all those fees, the impound fees and everything. And so I was probably negative $100,000 when you think about rents that were given up, and then the fees and everything, and the repairs. Oh, and by the way, some kids went in there and had parties and like knocked holes in the walls and stuff like this.
Oh my God.
This is a serious horror story, right? But the reason I'm calling this to your clients or to your listeners is because, at first it almost caused me to take my soccer ball and go home, right?
Yeah, for sure.
The confidence that came from turning this thing around. Now, I'm not kidding. It's my favorite property. But the confidence that came from being able to personally figure out how to turn it around. And I will admit, by the grace of God, I got lucky and I started in a really hot market. And so this property has more than doubled in value. Ooh. And I've refinanced it twice, and I've gotten back all the money the extra money I put in and everything, right? So now 10 years later, it looks like a total smoking, really smart move. But it did not at the beginning, I promise you. I'm telling you, I'm going to make a ton more money on the confidence that I brought from making it through that thing, right? And learning about questions to ask from the early property. So I would say to people, big lessons I learned there are certainly get references. I did get references, but you know what? I called his mom as a reference. Like I was pretty naive. And so she didn't have his last name, but I didn't ask really smart questions like, how do you know this guy?
Yeah.
And so, I learned some lessons, but don't go too fast when you're buying properties. I think you can learn 80% of the experience getting one property. I've seen people who get like 6. They refinance their primary residence and they get 6 all at once. And when that honeymoon ends, it can really crash hard. So, and I think everybody experiences a honeymoon. Mine was like 2 weeks long, but normally right? So I'll stop there. But that's my Halloween horror story, first one. But it's
to unpack, wow.
Isn't it? But I love it though.
Unpack, but I love stories where I see people who almost kind of like, if they did not persevere through their first deal, I mean, they were getting their teeth kicked in. You're basically got your teeth kicked in just because, like you said, it sounded like a great deal, but why would you have to put a guarantee on it if it was such a great deal? Yes. And in any good hot market, any growing market, you don't have to guarantee it because those rents, those tenants are going to be coming in. Mm-hmm. So, wow.
And due diligence is that. This is like the story. Due diligence is important. Have your standard operating procedures in place, things to check, people to okay, make sure permits like this. This is amazing for somebody that's new. Now, let me ask you this, Gary. You described how you found out about the property, about the subdivision. Did you go into it knowing that you were going to be acquiring rentals? Because I know there's so many strategies out there. Is that what you went into this? Was it a fourplex you said, or duplex?
Yeah, it was a fourplex, new construction fourplex in San Antonio. Did I go into it knowing I was going to be acquiring renters? Is that what you mean?
Well, that you were going to be going into the rental strategy for real estate. Like, did you already know you were going for cash flow? Because some people figured it out.
Yep. So at the time, I didn't know I was going to go, be an infinite banking expert and meet with clients full time, right? Yeah. What I thought I was going to do is live on the cash flow from my rentals. And now that I know more about myself, that's just never going to be satisfying for me. I mean, maybe if I'm out like building properties or syndicating or something, it would have been.
Yeah.
But I'm more inspired about what I'm personally doing now. At that moment, I was just trying to take money out of the markets to put it into a place where I could protect from inflation. Because also remember around this time, Congress started talking about this, or the Fed started talking about this thing called quantitative easing, and it was going to be temporary, and we were going to do a couple. But I was like, whoa, I've seen this printing money thing in my childhood. I'm getting on the other side of it, right?
Yeah.
So I was trying to do like two things at once. I was trying to get cash flow so that I could step away from my W-2 income and be around the family for the first time in a while. And I was trying to get my family's assets, what we had left after 2008, in some place where it would be protected from inflation, right?
Wow.
And so, ironically, this is really kind of funny, but I love Aaron Chapman's product, right? And he loves my product. But the reason I love his is because I'm not really excited about tenants and toilets. I think it's cool that the property appreciates every once in a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the cash flow didn't end up being the savior that got me out of my job, because I started my own business here, and I'm much more enthused about that now.
Right.
But the thing that really in my core is what caused me to go down there and fix this property.
Yeah.
Well, to back this up a little bit, I was in contract on 2 more when this all started falling apart.
Wow.
And my wife, with her great intuition and kind of focus, said, you got to fix this one or we're out completely. Right. So because in my core, I needed to have these Fannie Mae loans, these 30-year fixed rate mortgages, to prevent from, inflation happening to me again.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I focused so much. I gave up on my vacation and spent a lot of money to go fix it, because it was in my soul that I had to get the family protected from inflation. And I think a lot of listeners out there right now need to be thinking the same thing, because while it didn't happen 10 years ago when I thought it would, it is actually happening already right now.
Yeah,
that is amazing. And you know what? While we're on this subject, let's talk about. Thank you for sharing the history. And there are so many nuggets. I would highly encourage listeners to re-listen to what he said, because I'm pretty sure I counted at least 6 or 7 limiting beliefs that you just like smashed. So if you will, Gary, share with us what you're doing now, what you're passionate about, and how you're helping other people. Because I'm sure that your experience before is definitely a part of what you're doing now.
Yeah, it definitely is. And before I go there, one more thing, because as I look at the other side of the screen here and to see the two of you, if you are lucky enough to have a partner and you're in a position where the two of you are doing real estate together, or you just at least talk about it and you share finances and you all support each other. I've learned a tremendous amount from my wife, and I've also learned to not to get caught up in the whole male female thing of today's talking points. But when I say women's intuition, I mean that's just what I mean. Like, my wife's intuition is much better than mine. Her gut is just more about protection and smelling out, scam artists or con artists or whatever. When I was down, like 3/4 of the way through the completion, the only other time I visited the property before I bought it, I'm standing there and I'm backing up to take a picture of my property, and happened to be standing in front of it is the realtor that I bought the property through and the builder. And they're just talking, like, to me, to a guy. There's just 2 dudes talking that I was talking with, and I backed up. But my wife made this comment, "Hey, who are those 2?" And I said, "Oh, that's the builder and the realtor." And she said, "They look pretty chummy. What's their story?" And I'm like, that is rude, right? Like, I'm like, don't you support me in my real estate? All this stuff. Right? But you know what? Those 2 guys were in cahoots, and the realtor was covering up all of these problems. And there's no way I sensed that. It nothing at all to me, right? And it's not the only time that's happened, right? So that's just my advice to you. You should listen when somebody, gives you a little alarm bell, right? Because some of this stuff's not like physical, right? It's energy, and
yes,
people are tuned in differently than I think. And I know that it's a vulnerability for me that, somebody says something to me, I check it a little bit, I'm good. So, okay. So what do I do now? So I was getting ready.
That was so good. That was amazing.
That's some juicy stuff. And don't leave out the context. Thank you for adding that.
That's powerful. Yeah.
So I was getting ready again on the Real Estate Guys, listening to their podcast, and I heard this guy Patrick Donahoe say, you can purchase your properties without using your own cash as a down payment. And at that moment, like, when the student's ready, the teacher appears, right? So this was a few months after I was almost ready to close on this first building. And I had been studying about how do I reduce my risk and get more efficient. So I'd read like No Money Down by Robert Allen. And I'd read a bunch of stuff from CPAs and asset protection attorneys. And I was caught up in this whole thing about, I got a property. Do I need an LLC first, right? And so I was trying to figure out, how do I not have my money exposed to being stolen from me or lost?
This show is sponsored by HiveMind CRM. It is more than just a CRM. It is a real estate and business mastermind that comes with an all-in-one CRM. You can have unlimited websites and users. You can call, text, RVM, and email all in one user interface. And you can set up custom automations for any type and multiple businesses. 65% of companies start using a CRM system within the first 5 years of business. Once implemented, the HiveMind will save you on marketing, give you more time, and make more money. One of our users had his first $100,000 month using our system in June. We want to see you automate and accelerate your business. Text us at 210-972-1842 for future meetings, and of course to get our $1 course on how to make more than 6 figures on one land deal. You can schedule your free demo today at hivemindcrm.io.
In a lawsuit or something, because I was going to feel really stupid taking my money and protecting it from the markets into a real estate property and then losing it there, right?
Right.
So I was really focused. And when he said, hey, you don't have to use your own money as this down payment, I was super excited. And so I went through a process, and now he's my business partner because I got really, really interested and saw what I do today as a very good complement to rental properties for investors, but also just in general, even if you're not an investor, this is a fundamental way to make sure that your family moves in one direction, the positive direction with respect to finances throughout your life, right? And again, it enables people to have agency, what I call agency, which is the ability to make their own decisions and have their financial life set up so they can do so. And so what this is called is infinite banking, is the most common way of thinking about it. And it's essentially just storing your down payment money, your family's emergency dollars, money for upcoming trips or college, but storing it instead of in savings and checking accounts, storing it in high cash value, whole life insurance. And the reason you would do that is because it's just as liquid and available, but it also brings life insurance death benefit protection, and it grows at 4 to 5% with no tax instead of 0.1 in a checking account, right? And so I have another story about me and my wife that led me to really see the value here. So I start this off 2011. I actually had it done in time to fund the down payment on my fourplex. And so just kind of big picture, since we're doing this with audio, right? So I got a normal conventional loan because I love those 30-year fixed loans, put me on the right side of inflation, right? And then for the down payment, instead of putting my money in as the down payment, I borrow that money from the insurance company. Today I borrow from another bank, like use my policy as collateral, but instead of taking my own dollars and putting it into the property, I borrowed it from somebody else. And so none of my money was in the property. And I've repeated that over about 20 different properties over these years.
Wow.
So I'm at like property number 3. We have 3 at this point, like 3 years into this. And I'm looking around at what I want to do in life. I've been to a bunch of interviews and stuff, and I'm starting to think like I like this life insurance stuff, but I will admit I still didn't understand the big picture of it.
Yes.
And so I'm at an anniversary dinner with my wife, and this is a good insight into, this is like almost 20 years, but how naive I am sometimes. I'm all excited about having talked to the guy that day or the day before, and he found me 2 more properties, and I verbally committed to buy these properties, right? I'm excited to tell my wife. And so she's been in a nursing program for 3 years, getting her RN degree, not paying attention to real estate. And so we're at this anniversary dinner, and I say, honey, I've got an amazing surprise for you. I just contracted for properties 4 and 5. And she like drops her fork and in this busy restaurant. And she's like, you have got to stop. She's like, I don't know what is going on. Like, I've not studied this stuff. What if you die and we have all these loans out? Like, I don't even know how to run this stuff, right? And so it just wasn't the right place for her. I'm proud now to say she has 10 of her own properties, and I wouldn't say she
there we go.
I do, but she's on board, right? But at the time, I just not given her an opportunity to get to that point. But, here's the reason I'm tying this into the life insurance thing, because I started thinking about the what if you die thing, right? And so I saw the problem was she was concerned about the amount of debt we had.
Right.
So once I, things kind of calmed down a little bit, and, I said, one interesting thing, if you remember about how we funded these, you remember like Saturday morning a few months ago, and we were getting poked in the arm, by this nurse at like 8 a.m. so that we could get these life insurance policies. Well, we put the cash in there, borrowed against that. And so just by nature of how we did this, it's going to grow much faster. The cash is going to grow faster, and it's going to be more protected. But there's also like $2 million of death benefit that exceeds what I have in loans right now. So if I do die like that, right? So you've got some options. You can pay off the properties, have, huge cash flow from paid off properties, or you can let the bank have them and just take the policies. So that actually, I saw the color drain from her face. Like I saw, the visual impact of that. And that was a big thing for me as I, talk to clients about, this isn't just a really kind of unique trick to making more money on your down payments. It is, but it's a lot more than that for your family.
That is powerful. You know what? It's back to what you just said. When the student is ready, the teacher will appear. And back in 2010, 11, we got our licenses, but we didn't know. Like, we would have had no way of understanding that we would start. We would need to be in this place educationally and experience wise until you, like what you said, what you just said, understanding that if something would have happened to us, what are our kids going to do? They're not going to understand how to handle a tenant and things like that. Now, of course, we do have things in place, but I think it's powerful for our listeners to hear. That's a big thing. Like, we want to go out here and do this for our family, whether it's invest in real estate, to flip or rent or whatever. But at the end of the day, we got to make sure that not only are our assets protected, but our legacy, like our family's protected. So I really love how you touched on that. And the infinite banking system is insane. Like, we were there and we didn't even know where we were.
We're so close.
We're so close, but yet so far away because it just was not in our awareness. But now it's like, of course you better. So
Patrick Donahoe, my mentor over at Paradigm Life, he says something that's really awesome. He says that, when you establish this foundation and you put certainty into your life, it opens up the spectrum on all the uncertainty you can take on. Right. So, and it makes a ton of sense. Like, certainly, I mean, if you're a single young individual who's got a long runway and no mouths to feed, you can be crazy with, uncertainty. Right. But as we build up these things that are depending on us, right? Our family or whatever, right? Then our, just all the broader family, but definitely little kids and our spouses, right? Then we're building up this threshold that you got to get over before you can start doing those kinds of things, like be crazy and quit your job and go start a business, right?
Yes.
And so if you can build that foundation underneath things, it gives you wings, not literally, but it gives you wings. And I remember talking with a bunch of investors and clients at the beginning of COVID in 2020. And it was a very polarizing month. March and April, extremely polarizing because we just didn't know what was going to happen, right? But I'll tell you, when I say polarizing, what I mean by that is that a lot of people went to the I'm scared, don't know what's going to happen side, right? Like, I'm not going to take any action because I just don't know what's coming around the corner.
Right.
But there was this other group that was giddy as like little school kids. They were just like, Garrett, do you think 2009's here again? Are we going to get properties at this super cheap price, right? Are there going to be businesses we can buy? And I was just trying to figure out, like, why are there both sides? Like, what drives you to these two sides? And the one thing that I found common, and I was on the giddy little school kid side, but it wasn't actually intentional. But the thing that drove us in these different directions was how much cash did they have sitting around at that moment? Because if you were sitting there having just way heavily leveraged, had said, like, I know this isn't enough reserves, but we'll just grow our way out of it with cash flow the next 2 or 3 months and just be conservative, right? If you were at that moment where you had no cash, you had huge commitments, and then the mayor in every city you own properties in stood up and said, we know you're struggling. You don't have to pay rent for a while, right? At that moment, you either got scared to death or you said, wow, in my case, wow, I'm really glad that $300,000 investment I was going to make didn't, fell through because the bank said no. And now I got 300K sitting around. So if none of my tenants pay, I got a long time to ride this out, right?
Yep.
And so that just goes back to that. Like, I was looking for opportunity there because I had the foundation built underneath it. And, you know, it was somewhat accidental that time for me, but it won't be again, right? I met some guy the other day and he said, yeah, my minimum is 700,000 in cash. I'm like, wow, that's a new threshold, but I get it because of having lived through 2020.
Wow. Yeah. Powerful.
Yes.
Man.
Good stuff.
Baby, you go ahead.
Oh, man.
I'm digesting.
Like I said earlier with the beginning piece of just your story and how you acquired your first properties, and your story has so many clues in it that you leave behind for someone else to follow you, which I really appreciate that. Like, I see myself wanting to really dive deeper into the educational piece in this on the infinite banking side. So how would someone really start educating themselves on that piece?
Yes.
On infinite banking.
Yeah. So there's some great books out there. If they sent me an email, I can send them a copy of Patrick Donahoe's book. It's called Heads I Win, Tails You Lose, audio and ebook copy of it.
Okay.
The guy who started the process, really kind of made it popularized it, excuse me. Nelson Nash, he wrote a book called Becoming Your Own Banker. It's a little bit dated now, like the numbers in it are a little hard to understand. But you know, you can, I think, make the parallels to today's world. Patrick's gets a little more broad. He has you take a relook at like your 401k and some other, aspects like that. And there's a bunch of them. A good friend of mine and mentor, Kim Butler, has written a bunch of books. She calls them all, they kind of have this trend of like real estate lies and retirement lies, busting the real estate lies, busting the retirement lies, busting, the other financial kind of things. And her books are really good as well. But I think starting, I would go with Patrick Donahoe's book, and I'll send you a copy of that. And you just go to, it's just my name. So Gary@GaryPinkerton.com, and I'll gladly send it out to you. And I'll give my phone number as well. It's 860-389-7620. And so you can text that or, just give me a call.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you so much. See, he hits you with here's some knowledge. Oh yeah. And you can actually call me and reach out to me. And I love, I love the energy behind that. I know that the more people you help, your success will only grow and your impact will only continue to grow. So thank you so much for sharing your story, giving us your background and what you're doing now, because we can't just do one thing forever. Like this, I was just talking to Leon. He was going through the drawer in our room looking at technology, and I was like, man, that's obsolete. But it's like that in real estate. Like you learn one thing, and all of a sudden, 6 months, 6 days, 6 weeks later, it's like, oh, we don't do that anymore. We do this. So I love the what you mentioned with the infinite banking strategy. I think that's amazing.
Another thing on that, Brittany, is that speaking of like technology and getting obsolete, like we just don't really know what's coming around the corner, right? Like that was the big thing in 2020.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so having options, super important, right? So having that certainty in your life that opens up to whatever uncertainty comes or frees you up to handle whatever comes. So like if you're releasing that technology, that might've been a better idea back then, right? Because you don't know if it's going to be obsolete tomorrow. Right. But when it comes, what I'm paralleling here is that most people will tell you to be more certain, to be more confident. They would rather have a paid off house. A lot of people would say that, right? But I don't think that, it brings certainty with respect to you don't have a mortgage payment, but it does not bring certainty to the fact of, do you have liquidity when you need it, when that thing comes around the corner? None of us predicted COVID. And the guy who had $1 million of paid off real estate was not in as good a position as the guy who had $900,000 loan on that and $900,000 sitting in some liquid source.
100%. 100%.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So you just gotta, having equity, awesome. But if you can't get your fingers on it when you need it, it's wasted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because banks aren't lending when the money's tight.
Yep.
Right.
That goes back to a little bit of problems that we've had. We don't really concern ourselves to a slow, drippy, leaky faucet. That's kind of like that compares to, okay, I've got a little bit of a mortgage payment to pay, so I'm not really going to worry about it. But think about it. If you didn't have a mortgage payment to pay, where are you putting your money? It's got to go somewhere. And I think a lot of people don't think about that. Okay, well, I can just put that in the bank. But right now, banks are charging you money to put money in your bank.
Yes.
Like just the other day, I'm like, why am I getting hit with this $10 bill, this $40 bill, just random account analysis fees? I'm like,
no,
man, this is for the birds. This is for the birds. I mean, it really is.
Seriously.
And I know that you need to have some cash in reserves and all that, but man,
it makes you mad.
And I mean, can you also explain to the listeners how long infinite banking has been around? It may have been titled something else, but it's been around for a long time.
Well, so here's the not so complex business model for whole life insurance that started in the 1700s in America. I mean, every company I work with started in the mid 1800s, and the process is collect money, protect it from loss. So it's not in the markets. It's not, out in some public place where everybody can see it. And it can't be, well, in most cases, it can't be tied to like lawsuits and things. So it's just protected in many ways. So they collect the money, they protect it, and then they grow it on a guaranteed scale. And then they add dividends or what's called, the company profits to it, right? Because we're owners of a mutual insurance company.
Right.
And so they're collecting it and letting that pile grow of collected money. And then every year they're also adding to it. And so there's this pile of money growing in whole life insurance, which makes it a bank, right? And in 1936, I want to say, the insurance companies said, basically everyone was a farmer back then. And so the farmers would, get their crops back and they'd be flush with money. And the only safe place to put money was not in banks back then, but it was in life insurance policies because they didn't, get a bank run on them all the time. So the farmers would store their money in life insurance. And then maybe not the next spring, but a couple years later, they'd need the money because they were short to go. And so they have to cash in their policy to get it. Right. And so they were just always starting policies and cashing them in. Well, life insurance companies need about 10 to 12 years to break even on life insurance policies. So it was expensive. And they finally said, okay, listen, stop cashing it in. We'll give you access to our money. And then you pay us back when you're able to do so. Right. And so that's what the loan process came from. So kind of a long answer, but it's like 85, 90 years that you've had access to cash value in policies. And in the recent 20 years, insurance companies have allowed us to get more flexible on how we contribute. So you can kind of push money into what people will call like the cash portion of it. So the liquidity is there, 80, 85% of the money is available the moment you put it in.
Awesome.
That's brilliant.
Awesome.
That's brilliant. That's so good. And, for those out there that are like, insurance companies, maybe they're used to somebody coming and knocking at their door and selling somebody a $10 policy. You really got to educate yourself. Mm-hmm. If you go downtown and look at the tallest building downtown, I promise you, it's got to be insurance related. And it's one of the biggest, wealthiest industries. Like we're not talking about millions, we're talking about billion, trillion. It's a $1 trillion industry. Educate. Insurance is here to stay.
It's either banks or insurance companies. And by their very nature, they need to have liquidity because their business is answering the phone and paying death benefits. So they got a lot of liquidity sitting around. So go right back to what happened in 2020. Insurance companies went out and bought things because there was, they had the liquidity to do that.
Yep. As a matter of fact, one of them actually bought didn't somebody buy a real estate company or something? So somebody bought a real estate company. That was the insurance company bought a real estate company. We're like, that's obvious. So it's definitely a lot of moving and shaking. Well, thank you, man, for giving us all this amazing information and content. And I really hope that our listeners have taken it and taken notes. Listen to this again and again. Sometimes when I listen to something, it's just, I'll catch a couple of things, but when you go back, you're like, oh, it starts to click. So I really hope that they hear that. I can't let you go. I got to ask you one question. And this is something I'm keeping a tally with everyone that we speak with. What is one major limiting belief that you overcame and or still overcome in real estate?
In real estate. So I would go to the, you want to pay off your real estate. That was something that I felt like I had to plow a large down payment and get the thing paid off because it would, quote, make me safer. And that might be true if we were in a real money society. But the fact that the entire world is running on fiat money, meaning that we can just print it, right? You cannot remain safe by paying off properties and having no liquidity to be able to, to pivot. That's my biggest limiting belief.
That is incredible. Thank you for sharing that. We'll add that to the list. And hopefully, if you're listening and that was yours, it's been demolished. Well, awesome, man. That you've given. If you don't mind sharing your email address and phone number again for those that want to reach out to you, definitely access to the books, but also to connect with you. And maybe there's some synergy, and maybe they can relate, and they want some help getting started on their journey using infinite banking. Please share.
Absolutely. And I also want to point out that I have a couple people on my team. Both are doing exactly what I'm doing and in real estate. And they're a little newer to the journey. One of them's got 3 or 4 properties. One's just getting his first. So don't feel like, you're going to talk to some guy who's not in your neck of the path, right? I'm not on the same part of the path. I'm glad to connect you with my guys who are doing the same thing you're doing right now. So Gary at GaryPinkerton.com, just Gary, at GaryPinkerton.com. And my phone number is 860-389-7620. And yeah, absolutely. Reach out. I'll get you the book, and I'm glad to meet with you.
Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Gary, for being on this podcast with us again. And guys, thank you for listening to our podcast here at myfirstdealstory.com. And we would love for you guys to like and share this. And Gary has one more comment.
Come on,
yeah,
Gary,
thank you. So I forgot to plug my podcast. So I run a podcast called Gary's Gulch, Gulch, like a trench, right? And so that goes back to Ayn Rand, who was someone who came over and was talking about the problems, the risks of socialism that she grew up in Russia back in the 1940s and 50s. And so she was a prominent figure over here in the 80s. And so she wrote things like The Fountainhead, but she also wrote a book called Atlas Shrugged. And Atlas Shrugged is about America going socialism and people not being able to run their own businesses. And there's a group of people who go off to this place called Gary's Gulch. And you can either watch a 3-part movie on Amazon Prime, or you can read the 1,000-page book, or you can listen to the first episodes of my podcast, and I'll kind of dig into why it's called that. But I'd be honored if anybody would come listen.
Thank you, man. Shout out to Gary's Gulch. There we go. There's the podcast for you.
Love it, man. Love learning about history. And, there's a lot of things in history that have been forgotten about and not publicized.
Yes.
And thank you for those who, written the books. 1,000-page book. Yes, that's a lot of pages, but just think how much value you get out of reading that book, how much better person you could become.
Yes. And it's important also when you get into things like that and understanding different cultures and different backgrounds. Yeah. Everything may not be applicable to everyone. You just simply extract what's beneficial for you, and then you move forward with that. So anything we talk about on this podcast, we're open in such a way that we want people to learn from it. You don't have to go and adopt something 100%, but we want you to learn something different from what you know, and then exercise moving forward with your best judgment or whatever you're led to believe, feel, think, do.
The show is sponsored by The List Guys. Do you need more leads in your local or virtual market? 1 in 10 small businesses don't invest in any kind of marketing. The List Guys have over 35 plus list types to choose from, and you can mix and match any list or criteria. We also use the skip trace list and provide up to 7 numbers and email addresses. Every list you purchase will be scrubbed against previous purchases. The List Guys are here to save you time. Contact the List Guys today at www.1listguys.com. That's www.1listguys.com.
So I wanted to make sure I put that out.
Awesome.
All right.
Perfect. Thank you guys for joining. See you soon.
Woo!